Breaking news. This is your World War III update, and boy, do we have some major news today. This is going to be among the most important videos that I've done on the channel in recent memory. We're bringing all of the variables in the equation together because everything is inextricably linked on the geopolitical stage. Every single one of these wars that is being waged right now are linked together, and when one goes off, you can bet that it's going to aggravate all the others and likely set them all off at the same time. Now, the escalatory slope is so gradual, far more gradual than we've been trained to believe in the movies. And it's enlightened me to realize that there are two types of preppers out there. There is the COVID prepper who needed to have their arm twisted by the government to prepare, and those people have long since fallen off. They've been burnt out by prepping, and they're back to thinking that nothing bad is ever going to happen. They get spooked a little bit periodically when something happens, but they have no staying power in preparedness because they have no intrinsic motivation to self-preserve. I don't know if it's like an NPC characteristic, but these people periodically will pop up in the comment section and say, "Oh, I guess the world's ending again today," or some other sarcastic comment like that. And the reality is with these people, I've discovered, is that they are only moved when the government or the mass media, who always lies to them, every single time, always lies, but that still remains their official go-to for when to get the shit scared out of them and actually start taking action to become more self-reliant. Isn't that something? So they'll be back, right, when shit hits the fan. But the real OG preppers, this video is for those of you who are paying attention. All of these conflicts that are currently being waged right now, as I said, they are inextricably linked. And we have to look at everything in a broad context to truly understand how sensitive this situation is, and we need to also pay attention to the very gradual escalatory ladder, because even myself has succumbed to the falsehood that this thing is just going to pop off right away. But when you really go back and you watch my videos from 2 years ago, where we were talking about the prospect of pending nuclear war, things are so much worse right now, but because the frog is in this water that is heating up, reaching a boiling point, we don't even realize how hot it is getting because we acclimatize to every escalatory step of the way. We get adapted to it and we think, oh, it's no big deal that the Ukrainians are now firing weapons given the green light by the United States into Russia proper, and the Russians are saying, hey, you're crossing these red lines, and Ukraine is saying, yeah, all bets are off, our entire power grid is destroyed. This is the escalation period. Everybody's just like, nothing will ever happen until, and when something happens, the government and the mass media, they'll surely be my best advisor for what to do next. My friends, we're here. This is it, okay? So let me just get into the news. Now let's talk about the timing. First came the weapons. Remember back there was a time when people didn't think we were going to send Abrams tanks or ATACMS. There was a time when they didn't think they were going to send HIMARS. And now you're talking letting the F-16s bomb Moscow. That's really where they're at, or that's where this is going. And if you don't think that's where this is going, when every single thing has been pointing in that omnibus direction, then I don't know, man, you got to be a non-playable character. I mean, maybe you should just... I wish there was a test to see if you were an NPC. Like, we should make an NPC test. I'm sure somebody has. Anyways, so here's what we got going on. The treaties, the nuclear treaties, the unconventional and conventional armed forces treaties, they're gone. They're done with. Now they're putting in the troops, or instructors, which, as I've talked about the other day, you don't put instructors into a war like this. You put in intelligence gatherers, you put in the tip of the spear, you get people on the ground to make sure that the ground is primed for when the real cavalry arrives, okay? And now they're not even letting dual citizen Ukrainians, wrap your head around this, This is an egregious violation of human rights if I ever heard one. They are not letting dual citizen Ukrainians leave the country. Can you believe that? Because, of course, they need to be conscripted. Now, I don't know how many dual citizen Ukrainians there are. I mean, I'm sure there's, a few 100,000 who are maybe still there? Maybe tens of thousands? I don't know, maybe not even a few 100,000. I mean, why would you be, if you're a dual citizen up until this point, you must have seen the writing on the wall, okay? You can't leave the country anymore. Isn't that insane? So if you're a U.S. citizen, you are now trapped in the country. Maybe Gonzalo Lira foreshadowed all of this. I'm telling you guys, this is getting down to the wire. Alex Jones, not a, whatever. I mean, Alex is entertaining. It's kind of this pantomime, doomsday, the world is constantly ending, kind of like me, but way, far more of an OG in this space than I have ever been. And I agree with a lot of what Alex says, and I think Alex is entertaining, and, I would actually gladly have a conversation with Alex, which is not to say we agree about everything. Let's just get that straight. But they're coming after him. They're coming after Scott Ritter, who I also don't agree with, and I criticize a lot on this channel, but I do respect his body of knowledge. I don't respect his past and the things that he's done and been accused of and prosecuted for and all that stuff. But they're going after everybody. The Russell Brands, the Tuckers, the Kanyes maybe that one is somewhat justified. They're going after the Tates, okay? They're going after everybody. And I've always said that right before some big shit is going to go down, they need to make sure that everybody knows who's boss before they bring the crackdown in, before martial law, to preempt the mass media stringent controls that are going to be put into place. And they're already talking about this. In fact, I just did a study here in Canada where they talked about the number one threat, okay, of all the threats that we talked about, the existential threats to the human species. The number one threat, they think, the highest probability and the most potential for damage is going to be misinformation. Well, you know where that's going with Bill C-21 and bills. There's so many bills now that are trying to crack down on our rights and freedoms to speak our minds that I can't even keep track anymore. That's where this is going. They got to crack down before the shit hits the fan. Now, look at the timing here. So, you have the crackdown, okay? You have the Ukrainian front lines basically dissolving. At least, that seems to be the consensus, even in Western media now, that Ukraine isn't doing so well. They're holding up in Kharkov, but apparently there are some big plans being hatched by the Russians as well. And now they're just started targeting the S-400 and S-300 systems that are inside Russia with American weapons. If you don't think that's a serious escalation, again, I can only walk with people so far before you're just a burden, before you're on your own. I pray to God that nothing happens, but at this point in time, something's freaking going to happen. I mean, something's going to happen in China, in Iran, in Lebanon, in South Korea, North Korea. It's going to happen everywhere. It's probably all going to happen at the same time. That's what it's seeming. You have this plan now being floated. This was actually initially proposed last year. Everybody's getting their panties in a knot about it. But really, this 300,000 combat readiness force of NATO, this has been on the cards for a long time. But now they're talking about the corridor. So let's really try to think about what's actually going on here. Because you need to understand, if there is a war between Russia and NATO, Article 5 dictates, okay, they want us to believe that Russia and NATO can fight a conventional war without it going nuclear. Now, I do think, and I have provided some room for the idea that maybe we might fight a tactical nuclear war. And we have some kind of weird arrangement where we keep it under a certain kilotonnage. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not even saying it's that probable. But anything is possible at this point in time. That the consummate diplomacy that the Russians have fostered, and they fostered such a gradual escalation curve when they, quite frankly, had so many red lines, they could have dropped nukes 2 years ago and nobody would have been that surprised. The fact that they haven't done it yet is almost baffling. It almost makes you think they got some kind of super weapon. And sure, some people might say that super weapon is just soft power around the world, having a lot of friends, having 7 billion people behind you, okay, an endless body of human resources to draw from, an endless amount of resources to draw from, and just a long-term strategy. Maybe that's the magic they have, or maybe they have some secret laser AI thing that we don't know about. I'm just being facetious. So I totally lost my train of thought. Anyways, why are they floating this idea? Because this is farcical. This is truly farcical to believe that there's going to be a war with NATO and Russia, and that the Americans are going to swoop in through these 5 corridors, which are all road-based. Notice that. So none of these are at the ports. So they're presuming that all the ports are going to be destroyed, and that they're going to have to go by rail or by highway, or by different ways like that. So they're not going to be able to access the Baltic Sea, apparently, because I guess Kaliningrad's out of the question. This just doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. This just seems like something for public consumption. Now, it does make sense if you're planning on waging a never-ending Cold War, but even then, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The only way this makes any sense is if the United States is trying to reassure Europe that it's going to come to its aid, that it's going to extend the nuclear umbrella and and respect Article 5 and come to Europe's aid if and when a direct engagement with the Russians ensues. But maybe the goal is for Europe to be destroyed and for Russia to be destroyed, and for the United States to come in and basically clean house. Maybe that's the idea. Maybe that's what they're forecasting here. Because remember, if the euro crashes, that 20% of global reserve currency status that the euro fulfills in the world, that's got to go somewhere, and that can maybe put a bit more fuel in the depleted US fiat gas tank to take us a few more years. So I think what's happening here, because 300,000 troops, number one, what is that going to do? That's nothing. I mean, they can't even take part of Ukraine with 300,000 troops. You're telling me you're going to take this entire front with 300? Now, obviously, that's to supplement the troops that are already existing in these countries, and that's just US troops. Still, something just doesn't seem right about this idea of having these logistics corridors developed. And now, sure, it's prudent planning, it's redundancy, it's to ensure that if there is, let's cut to the chase. This is the main point. This is probably for after the nuclear bombs drop. To be brutally honest, this type of force, to be able to go in there and lock things down after shit hits the fan, or this is for the purpose of a preemptive strike on Russia. Because what remains of Russia and the Russian military maybe then could be overthrown by a handful of troops. However, we all know that if this thing goes nuclear, all of Europe is destroyed. Destroyed. Now, that's not to say that we don't really know what the end result is going to be. Nuclear winter is still very theoretical, as much as people try to say it's an empirical sound science, and it is to an extent. I'm not saying it seems to make sense, but we just don't know. So just the idea that they think that they're going to fight a conventional war with Russia and that they're going to need troops is just weird. So it almost seems like either this is just to reassure the public that maybe they're going to do something, and don't worry, we have a plan, when really they have no plan. Have you seen Jake Sullivan or Anthony Blinken or John Kirby or any of these people lately? I mean, these people have no idea what's going on, okay? I mean, they do. They have an idea of what's going on, but there's no long-term thinking because, even if they wanted to think strategically, they're bound by these democratic election cycle timeframes. So you just get into the habit then of thinking very short term. And the only people who can think long term are those non-partisan deep state people who we tend to criticize, but really they're the only ones that can have any sort of long-term plan whatsoever. So, okay, where are we going here? Number one, this presumes that Russia is going to beat Ukraine, okay? That's number one. So they're presuming that Russia is going to be able to amass a force strong enough. Remember the Russians who were supposed to run out of weapons long ago? The media didn't lie about it then, did they? Of course they did. And those same people, anyways. When the Russians defeat Ukraine, that's the only time that this is going to be relevant. Because right now, when they're pinned down in Ukraine, how are they going to possibly branch out into any of these other spaces? So this is almost presuming that Ukraine is going to lose, which would make sense because right now, as far as I know, and this is being reported on Ukraine channels now, so they can't even lie about it with propaganda anymore, the power grid has been completely eviscerated. It is destroyed, for lack of better terms, and it's summer. Now, if they can't get that thing up and running by winter, shit's going to hit the fan. I need to read you quickly a comment by a Ukrainian official. He has said, an advisor to the head of Zelensky's office, Mikhail Podolyak, said that all the red lines of the conflict in Ukraine have disappeared and its escalation has begun. All of yesterday's red lines have disappeared, he said. Everything that seemed unthinkable yesterday is already a reality. Escalation, yes, he wrote. Escalation, yes. The Ukrainians are already targeting a city near Kursk that has a nuclear power plant. The Kurchatov nuclear power plant has come under threat of MLRS and long-range missiles from Ukraine that have been given to them by the Brits, the French, and the Americans. Holy shit. They're about to do it. And if Ukraine thinks that they're going down, as the saying goes, desperation leads to escalation. Inevitably, when you got somebody who's cornered, they're going to do some crazy shit. Just like Netanyahu is contemplating today doing some crazy shit because that war between Lebanon is at a point where it could happen. It could start officially at any moment. And to not call that a war already is, well, we're really stretching the definition there. We have to talk about that. We have to talk about the Iranian nuclear clock issue. A new data point has been added to that escalatory ladder today that is very important. Another box has been checked. We have China now going to march ahead because Biden has now approved troops. So it's no longer a policy of ambiguity and strategic ambiguity and respecting the one China policy. It is now a policy of saying we're going to send troops in there. And not only that, we're going to send in 30 defense contractors right after China simulates a blockade of Taiwan. So you know shit's going to get real because they've already sanctioned some of these companies and they're going to start sanctioning a lot more. We have live fire exercises that are going to start recommencing along the Korean demarcation zone. Do you see all these things happening at the exact same time? You have a new election in the UK. You have an election in the US this year. You have an election in Iran right away. You have that whole death of the president. And I've been talking to some Iranians, and a lot of them suspect that it was actually the Ayatollah's hand in this, but who knows? Lots of conflicting theories about that. You have a Black Sea drone that went offline today. You had a shutdown, a outage of major telecoms networks today that we'll talk about in just a moment. All of this stuff is interconnected. If that wasn't a cyber attack, I mean, look at all the things that have just happened. You have Berkshire Hathaway incident that happened just yesterday, where Berkshire Hathaway, I can't remember what the stock goes for. It's Warren Buffett's stock, what do you call it, ETF. It is $250,000, $250 million a share or something. It plummeted to like $500 for a few moments. And a bunch of different stocks plummeted to like $500. So that was some weird glitch. So it makes you wonder, are there cyber attacks happening already that we're not being told about? Because of course, these are things that you would never want to admit for insurance liability's sake. You don't want the public being spooked. There's a reason why they have daily withdrawal limits on cash machines, even though you're good for it, okay? And hint, hint, you should probably start taking out a little bit of cash here and there. It's not financial advice. I guess I can say that because it's not like you're just transforming it into from a digital form to a physical form. But you might want to consider doing that, because even on the day that shit goes down, even if you're lucky enough to get cash out of the machine, how much are you going to get? And sure, cash is not going to be worth much in the long run. And if you're a prepper, you don't really care about that because you're all squared away anyways. But in the short term, cash will be valuable. Before the whole silver, precious metal Bartertown theater unfolds, it's going to be cash. People are going to recognize that. That's what we're trained to. People are going to be looking for a cell phone signal 9 years after the apocalypse. We are so hooked on electronics that it's going to have a lot of staying power, unfortunately. Now, right now, the Americans are sending in well, they've had advisors there for a long time, but the French are going to start to do it. And recall that this is how the Vietnam War began. First, they brought in advisors. Then those advisors and instructors, as they so called them, which were really just, coordinators and administrators, they were starting to get attacked. And so, well, I guess we got to send in these small squadrons of troops to protect these instructors, and we got to send in more weapons. And so that is what they call mission creep. Okay, so eventually that is it's already happening in Ukraine. I mean, they've already crossed the Rubicon, guys. And this is, I don't know what it is, if it's a genetic thing or what, that allows a person to not succumb to normalcy bias. Because it's clear as day that all these things are about to flare up. And I get frustrated even with people who are in the know. And if you were compelled by a major event to go and do something drastic that's of a preparedness related activity, and then it's nothing, the thing didn't materialize, and then you got tired, and then you came back to the city or whatever, you got it all wrong. Okay, the whole idea of preparedness, especially when we're talking about these 0-day events, is, how can I put this? You're not reacting. Okay, nothing I do for prepping is reacting. However, what I will say is that the fact that I wasn't doing what I'm doing now during COVID should tell people something. Even though I predicted pandemics since 2014. I said that was the most likely scenario to unfold. In fact, the year before that, me and Survival Lily, we went on a canoe trip, and that was one of our conversations, is that, yeah, the pandemic is coming, 2019, and lo and behold, 2020, it came around. But there's a reason why I didn't head off grid at that time, because I knew in the back of my mind that we still had a lot of time. Shit was getting very weird, but I didn't think it was going to escalate to what I think this is going to escalate to. And, the night is darkest before the dawn, but when you flip that, the day is brightest before the dark. I don't know if that's probably totally untrue, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. All crashes came on the backs of massive sky-high peaks and prosperity, and that's what we're seeing in the stock market right now. You don't have a stock market crash come when there's a bear market. You're already in it, right? You're already on the downward slope. Crashes come when you have these insane valuations of stuff Like, look at this for a second here. What are we looking at here? Okay, what are we going here? Oh boy, I got so many links open here. Okay, take a look at this. Most people don't realize. Do you realize that the price of beef has went up in the last 20 years? Not even 20 years. Since 2007, the price of beef has 4x'd. 400% increase in the price of beef. During COVID, it was 700%. Now it's coming down a bit, but of course we got bird flu coming back. What I'm trying to say is things are getting really bad and most people don't realize it. 65% of the middle class in the United States say that they're struggling, okay? They're struggling just to make ends meet. And we're at a point right now where everything's going to start to break. And we're going to see, we are the 99% 2.0. We're going to see civil unrest in the run-up to this election and understand the timing. Why is it that right before, in the run-up to the election, why is it so synchronized, the escalation, to the run-up to the election? Distraction. Scott Ritter was banned from leaving the country. Now listen, I don't like Scott Ritter and a lot of things that he says. In fact, let me take that back. It's not that I don't like Scott. I actually, a lot of the things he says I think are things I would agree with. Do I necessarily trust him? No. But the fact that he is now not allowed to leave the country, and here is what he had to say. It might be a good thing that you and I didn't go to Russia. He's referring to Judge Napolitano. This is in the interview that he just did today. Because I'm very fearful that while the St. Petersburg Economic Forum is underway, that a red line will be crossed. And Russia will respond, and we will be looking at an outbreak of war between NATO and Russia. Now, I've followed Scott since prior to the war starting. And he has always been fairly conservative. Now, as a former nuclear intelligence inspector, he knows his stuff when it comes to nuclear weapons, although some might say the knowledge base there is a little bit dated, and sometimes when you're too close to the problem, you're not open to the new climate of technologies and strategy that's unfolded. But he tends to be very conservative. And as of recent, I would say in the last 6 months, all of those guys, that whole clique, the Larry Johnsons, the Douglas McGregors, the Ritters, the Napolitanos, all the other guys that they get to interview them 5 times a week, they're all starting on this World War III nuclear Armageddon is near kicked. We've been saying that for 2.5 years. Now that's Alex Jones' whole shtick, right? He wasn't talking about this a year ago or a year and a half ago. Now this is all he talks about. Because we're here. I mean, you could see this coming from a mile away, but they didn't tell you it was coming until now. And now he's saying, I'm glad I didn't get invited to the St. Petersburg conference, or I couldn't leave the country for reasons that he thinks are unconstitutional, and they very well may be, because he thinks that the shit's going to hit the fan. Now, is it because, did he just use that as an excuse? Is this a way to win some street cred? Sometimes when they want to create a hero for the masses, when they want to do the COINTELPRO thing, they got to, it's like when the rappers, they used to get themselves arrested, and so they would use that picture on their album. I think J-Rock from Trailer Park Boys made a bit of a skit about how people do that thing. So they would get arrested so they could talk about how bad they were, and so people would believe that they weren't studio gangsters, as Eazy-E would say. Russian military sources claim a fundamental decision has been made to counter American strategic reconnaissance RQ-4 Global Hawk UAVs operating in the Black Sea region now. A few weeks ago, I tweeted out, that thing's going to get shot down. I'm telling you, that thing is going to get shot down. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just give me a minute to bring up the deets here. Where the hell is it? Did you guys know that Taiwan is now laying sea mines in anticipation of a Chinese invasion? Nothing to see there. I'm sure it's nothing. Nothing bad is ever going to happen again because the government said so. It's nice out today, so I guess it's never going to rain again. This is it. Fort 13 or Fort 12 or Fort whatever. Well, Fort's about to get its ass shot down because today a drone was intercepted over the Black Sea. And this is a sign that we're getting very, very close. Now recall, the Russians already brought down a drone. In fact, they were calling that the first casualty, non-human casualty, of course, because it was just a robot that got brought down, of the war between Russia and the United States, this war. The U.S. Air Force RQ-4B Global Hawk unmanned aerial vehicle strangely disappeared from radar today while flying over the Black Sea. The drone's trajectory was intersected by an aircraft flying from Antela to Sochi. So, it went off radar, which they're reporting as very strange. Now, these things happen, you know, the GPS spoofing, sometimes flight radar, you can't always see stuff. But when they go off radar like that, it becomes a problem. Because if you're not broadcasting, I'm just presuming, if you're not broadcasting that you're there, the Russians have to presume that it's an enemy plane, that it's a threat, and then it's liable to be shot down. And they can say, well, you had your transponders off, you weren't identifying yourself. So was this some sort of EW, electronic warfare? Was this cyber? Was there Russian planes in the air that were messing with this thing? Are they sending a signal? Because there's all kinds of rumors of big attacks that are about to happen. Of course, the Ukrainians now today officially, even though they've been using, this whole thing is kind of a dog and pony show too, with the allowance of using weapons inside Russia, because anything that Ukraine uses from this point, from probably since maybe post-summer of 2022, was really not their own creation, or it was not funded solely by them. So if you're funding something, then, you know, these drone attacks on Russian critical infrastructure, if the Russians truly believe that that's just the Ukrainians acting by themselves, then I don't know, maybe they ain't as bright as we think. But I don't think so. I think they know exactly what time it is, and it's time to get some F-16s. The F-16s are there, I'm sure of it. Okay, so this is the timeline of F-16s. Now, they're talking all the way out to 2028. Today, you had, I believe it was the Norwegian defense minister, come out, and he basically said that they think that the war is going to start in 2 to 3 years, that they have 2 to 3 years to prepare for the major war with Russia to begin. Okay? So get a load of this. The North Atlantic Alliance only has 2 to 3 years to prepare for an armed conflict with Russia. This was stated by the Commander-in-Chief of the Norwegian Armed Forces, Erik Kristoffersen. Now, the goalpost is certainly moving. Recall the revelation earlier in the year when Fox News and Bild dropped that story about how the Germans were wargaming for a war to start with the Russians in 2 years, or next year, as they referred to it. We had predictions of 8 years, 20 years. This 2 to 3 years actually seems like a very realistic timeline in light of what is going on. However, we could see a major escalation happen at any moment. And now that Steadfast Defender has officially concluded, okay, and all of the infrastructure has now been put into place, and a lot of those troops are staying right where they were training, the time is ripe for an event, for an escalation. And clearly they're trying to provoke the Russians, right? Clearly, if this was just about depleting the Russians, think about this. If this was solely about defeating the Russians financially, which would arguably be a strategic defeat, and just running them dry and making sure that they couldn't go further into Ukraine, if that's what this was truly about, then why would they be authorizing Ukraine to strike into Russian territory? Why wouldn't they just be providing them with every single thing they needed to defend the country? Now, I get it. It's a very weird state of affairs when you think about it, because you have Russia who's attacking Ukraine, and Ukraine should legally, by international law, be able to defend itself and attack Russia. But because they're on a lifeline from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world doesn't want nuclear war, they can't attack Russia with those weapons, but now they can. So Russia is put in this position where that lifeline is becoming an existential risk. And as such, they now have to terminate that lifeline. And they've been very specific about the targets that they're going to hit inside NATO countries if this continues. And that's where we're at. That is where we're at right now. NATO is currently attacking Russia right now. People laughed at me for saying that 2 years ago, because I said it in an analogous sort of way where I meant that, Ukraine is being funded by Ukraine and Ukraine is attacking Russia. So ergo, you could pretty much say, but now it's happening, literally happening. All the red lines have been crossed. They're preparing the Schengen corridors through Europe, and we got 2 to 3 years to prepare for war. And for that, I am thankful, because I want to get this orchard producing fruit. But I don't know if it's going to be safe to eat if the fallout blows up here. John Kirby doesn't rule out deep strikes in Russia beyond Belgorod. I mean, why would they even say that? Now, they're going to rationalize it and say, well, it's because the only way Ukraine can force the Russians out is if they take out those systems that are being used from Russian territory, right? Which creates a disadvantage from the Ukrainian point of view if they ever want to drive the Russians out, which is impossible at this point in time. If that was really the goal, if the goal wasn't to provoke the Russians into doing some crazy shit to start a massive war, then that's what you would do. But it's pretty clear that that's what they're doing. And, it just baffles me that people are waiting for the media to spell it out for them. They're waiting to be told what the plan is. And people look at me like I'm crazy because I'm telling them, no, this is real. This is really happening right now. Okay? And they think, even the most hardened of preppers believe this. And I just, look, I don't want to say trust me, because you should trust no one at this point in time. But trust me, this is it. This is the big one. I'm not saying this is it, it's going to happen tomorrow. That's the trajectory we're on. It's as clear as day. Anyone with 2 functioning brain cells to rub together and a few synapses connecting the two can figure this out. According to Sergei Ryabkov, Russia's deputy foreign minister, the U.S. is close to making a fatal calculation. What is the real red line? That's what we all want to know. Because we know there's these back channels of communication which are far fewer than they were during the Cold War. And that should concern people. Because people often compare it to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the Russians and the Americans were talking a lot more. There were wars going on, but not like this, right? And there was just a lot more open dialogue about stuff. There was a lot of miscommunication, and the Russians didn't have a whole lot of nukes. So even if shit popped off at that period of time, it would have been the end of the world for them probably, but not us. So you really have to wonder what the plan is. And if you think they're going to tell you the plan, at this point you're dumb. I mean, you're dumb. You might be smart, you might have a PhD, you might have a high IQ, but on some level, analytically, you're really stupid. If you really think that anybody in a position of power is going to tell you how this is going to unfold right now. And I'm not saying that to be elitist or harsh. It's just when you're like me and you're looking at this every single day, and I got this Cassandra complex thing going on where I'm warning people ahead of time constantly. And most of you guys, I love you. Like the 200,000 who come to the channel ever, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the rest, who it's like the only time they ever get it is when they go silent because shit's hitting the fan. And you know that's when they're panicking. And then quickly, things come back into focus and, well, I guess nothing bad will ever happen again. Jake Sullivan, Count Dracula himself, is saying that the United States administration expects announcements of major new arms shipments to Ukraine in the coming weeks. They're doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on this shit. That's what's going on. Poland is going to start using deadly force on immigrants. Shit's hitting the fan there on the Belarusian border. They're looking for every excuse that they can get to militarize the border. And I'm assuming that Belarus is giving them a reason to do so. And apparently there was one officer who they're getting stuff thrown at him. They're getting spears thrown at him. Like, it's just crazy. So now they're about to open up. And it's going to get ugly, and then it's going to be a fiasco. And yeah, dual citizens can no longer leave Ukraine. That is insane. According to a brigadier commander, a brigade commander of the Russian military, he claims that they want us to use nukes. For now, the situation is developing along the path of maximum escalation. This is a guy who is right on the front lines. We are well aware that the West and the authorities of the so-called Ukraine use high accuracy, long-range weapons in attempts to provoke us to step up the use of force, Borodai said. I'm not sure what his actual rank is, but he's brigade commander. Wow. I think that's all we need to talk about on the Ukrainian front. In terms of what's going on in the Middle East, if you didn't catch the news yesterday, a part of northern Israel burned down, 2,500 acres, which for Israel, which isn't a massive country, it's a sizable amount of land that was burned. Now, there's different theories as to what caused this. Some people said it was Hezbollah directly using wildfire. Interestingly, when we did our video on asymmetrical warfare, that of course the algorithm completely truncated because, let me not get into that, but I think there's a bit of a glass ceiling for this channel at this point in time. They want you to get a little exposure, but they don't want you to be too big, and maybe they're doing me a favor with that. Anyways, fires burning in northern Israel. Were these set by the Israeli authorities because they know that fighting is going to ensue in these regions? And if the Lebanese fighters are coming over, are they going to be using those forests for concealment? Are they going to get in the way of strategic maneuvers in that direction? Or was this just classic hybrid warfare, leveraging wildfire against your adversary? That's what this could have been. But either way, the war with Lebanon and Israel is, at this point, how can you not call it a war? There are, on some days, dozens of back and forth missile volleys, soldiers dying on both sides every day, heavy casualties on both sides, civilian casualties. There was a meeting with the Israeli War Cabinet tonight to determine whether or not they were going to officially go to war. Some people have been wondering, why have they been dragging their feet on Gaza? And I don't think it has anything to do with, I really don't think it has anything to do with international sentiments about human rights or anything like that at this point. They're already in Rafah. They went into Rafah. They said it was just a little exercise, and they've constantly expanded the mission ever since. But of course, Netanyahu knows now that as soon as he's out, he is potentially looking at jail time. So he's now been incentivized to escalate. And you have a lot of crazy, batshit crazy war hawks in the Israeli government who are pushing him into going all out, just scorched earth. And you got to remember what's going to happen when that happens. You're going to get attacks on Israeli strategic targets, including the Dimona nuclear power plant. And when that happens, that fallout's probably not going to blow back into that radioactive dust is not going to blow back into Lebanon, because that's not the prevailing wind direction. The prevailing wind direction, I've looked into this, maybe not at all times of the year, but tends to be north to south along the jet stream. So that means that if Israel tries to nuke Lebanon, if they resort to the Samson option, it's scorched earth. It's death to everybody at that point in time. Speaking of death to everybody, Iran has opposed a new draft resolution that has been levied by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. So Europe, and this is basically the gist of it, okay? So you remember House Resolution 559 that was passed in the United States last year that said if they thought or had any suspicion that Iran was going to get a nuclear weapon, that they could basically go to war, or that they would support Israel going to war. Now, this is the last box that they needed to check. We're definitely this is a critical box. Europe claims that there was uranium traces detected at non-approved sites. And you notice how they're playing this very safe. Now, I presume Iran ain't full of dummies. They must know that the whole goal here is to keep the price of oil down, to manage inflation so the US dollar and US economy doesn't collapse. They must realize that at this point in time, that they're taking their time with this. But Russia and China today came to Iran's back and said, we now have this joint proposal, this joint resolution to revive the nuclear deal, and that they're going to manage it, basically saying that, look, we got Iran's back, and they're under our nuclear umbrella. That's essentially what they're saying. But here's the claims, that Iran had uranium traces detected at non-approved sites. They claimed Iran has barred top enrichment experts from entering the facility. Now, why would Iran not want this at this point in time? They're at war with Israel. You know, for all intents and purposes, it's de facto state of war with Israel. Let's just call it what it is. Would you let the IAEA into your country so that those guys can go and disclose everything that they see to the Israelis? Why would you do that at this point in time? They're not going to do that. That's why they don't want them in there. Continued failure by Iran to provide the necessary, full, and unambiguous cooperation with the agency to resolve all outstanding safeguard issues may necessitate the production of a comprehensive updated assessment of possible presence of the use of... So it's a very long-winded way of saying we're going to slap you on the wrist and we're going to reprimand you, which is basically inconsequential in and of itself. But it's one of those boxes that needs to be checked so that this House Resolution 559 can actually be acted upon. And all of that is going to feed into the justification to initiate a war with Iran when the time comes. There's a reason why Israel got $3 billion worth of F-35s today. Another 25 F-35s. Just, you know, we just have them laying around. The ones that aren't crashing, that is. The U.S. is going to sanction the ICC over Israel. Congress passed a bill. Now think about this. Isn't it funny that both the Russians actually put out an arrest warrant for the same guy that Netanyahu threatened? So isn't it interesting how the United States and Russia have a common enemy in the International Criminal Court, and where is it based? It's based in Europe. So, that almost tells you something very, very fundamental, right? You have Israel getting all this stuff. You know that Israel is America's right-hand man, and they are priority over the EU and NATO, because there's this theory that the whole game plan is for Europe to destroy itself fighting the Russians, and the United States is going to sit back and watch and then come in there afterwards and clean house. And this is really what they have to do if they want to prepare to go to war with China, which is their primary adversary. I mean, the Chinese economy is, I don't know how many times bigger than the Russian economy. Probably like 15 times bigger. Now, obviously, they don't have the raw materials and the resources, but it still is. China is as big as the United States. Most people don't realize now a lot of it's desert. But, it's a massive country, and they have the capability to build ships like it's nobody's business. They are just building everything at lightning speed. And we've just convinced ourselves, oh, it's poor quality. And why is it poor quality? I mean, they're smarter than we are, like in terms of IQ. They are, more resourceful. They work together. They're meticulous. I mean, if they want to build something that's going to work and not break down, they're going to build it. Now, if they're just trying to mass produce cities because of their own housing real estate bubble issues, that's another story. Israel is waiting to attack Hezbollah because they're stocking up. They're loading the boats because they know right when that shit hits the fan, the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, they're all going to get activated at the same time. They're going to start bombing the shit out of all the ports. And Israel is going to be landlocked. And that's why you have B-52 nuclear-capable bombers being flown close to the coastline of Lebanon today as a threat, basically saying, this is where it's going to go, right? And that happened today. So Israel is waiting. They're biding their time. They're stocking up. They're biding their time. They're stocking up and getting ready. And when Trump gets in there, I mean, they ain't going to give a shit. That's probably what they're waiting for. They're probably waiting for Trump to get in there. But here's the thing. No matter who wins, there's going to be that critical window. If he's a lame duck, Biden, after November, then you got 2 months, I guess, for weird shit to happen at that point in time. That could be the critical window when things just go bananas. Thank God election season is in the winter, because that somewhat minimizes the risk of civil war, at least in some states, because people are pussies and they don't want to go outside when it's cold, no matter how hard of a rebel they are. Yeah, so Biden has approved troops for Taiwan. Can you believe that? Look at this, man. This is a Ukrainian website. This ain't Russian propaganda. It's a real deal. The Ukrainians are fighting back, though. They're not taking it anymore. And you know what? If I was the Ukrainian, I'd be saying, look, we're dying for NATO. Why aren't NATO troops here helping us out? You guys remember the Russian radars that were destroyed or attacked? Well, this map gives you a good representation of how they work. And I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but there's a series of these radars that detect. We'll have to get Castle Bravo back on here to talk about this. He's a guest we had to talk all about the nuclear program and things of that nature. But basically, this gives you a map. So the ones that were targeted were here and here, I believe. So that, in a lot of ways, covers the Middle East. So a lot of people were tying that into what was going on with Iran when their radars were taken out within the same few weeks of that happening, right? So I just thought that map was kind of interesting, but I'd like to get an expert back on to explain. What is this about? This is from the Telegraph. I never touch this issue because it's just not even worth it. I mean, look, you got to be wise enough to know what hill to die on. And fortunately now it's just mainstream, so what the hey. I can proudly say that I just basically deferred to naturalistic remedies throughout the course of things. It cost me a lot of money because I had to get frequently tested if I wanted to live my life in any meaningful way possible. To go into places, I need to show my papers, right? But look at what we have here. The Telegraph, a reputable reputable mainstream news source in the UK, claims that COVID, I'm not even going to say the word because then the video is going to get something, may have helped fuel rise in excess deaths. Huh. Ain't that interesting? What a damn surprise. Not at all surprised. And wouldn't you know, those big pharma stocks are going up once again. Sometimes, guys, just because I don't say things doesn't mean I don't know things. And that's why I'm still here. This is what happened today. There was an outage. AT&T, Verizon, Cricket Wireless, Consumer Cellular, all across the United States. I don't know how long it was. I don't know how serious it was. But just another vulnerability in the system. A broad attack surface, and the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Are they priming us for the big one? Is this a probing operation? New York Stock Exchange still investigating technical issue that showed Berkshire Hathaway share price dropping 99%. This on the same day that what's his name? Not Hello Kitty. What the hell is his name? The GameStop guy. Yeah, just that was on the exact same day that whole GameStop shit was going on again. People are still playing that. I don't even know how shorted the stock is right now, but people are still FOMOing into it. That's what you see when shit's about to hit the fan. Take a look at this. 5 largest companies as share of S&P 500 total market cap is way higher than it was during the tech bubble. Now, the market isn't as overvalued as it was during the tech bubble. It's close, and it's getting closer every day that this whole charade continues. But look at that. I mean, that is pretty crazy. I don't know where it was back there. I don't know what sort of cycle arises here. It looked like small business made somewhat of a comeback at that point. But what does this all mean? Well, it just means that everything is being consolidated into an oligopoly, a international few of multinational corporations that are going to basically determine what we think, feel, and say in the future. Taiwan is mining this part of the island because they anticipate that China is going to make a move very, very soon. I'm just jumping over the map here because it's getting late in the video. Lockheed Martin, this is an observation I had. They've been given a new contract today. They've got to have had billions in contracts in the last few years, you would think. Now, if this starts to run up, then I'll eat my words about this. But you'll notice that in spite of all the wars on every front and all of the expenditure of our ammunition stocks and our weapon stocks, that this hasn't moved really that much since 2019. And so what that tells you is that they knew all this was going to happen. Now that might seem like obvious to many of us. Another interesting data point is that around the time of the Maidan coup, that's when you started to see this bugger tick upwards. So something happened here, and this surprisingly was actually around the time that China started dumping US treasuries. So, I mean, this thing has been progressing for a while, okay? It's been progressing for a long time. They knew, because now, even in it looked like 2022, it was down a bit. So a lot of these MIC, military industrial complex stocks, they had all this priced in long ago. So that just tells you, that's the reason why I show that there's a plan and there's a club. And as the late, great George Carlin said, you ain't in it. Here's another more trivial point of escalation. The Kremlin has called the U.S. an enemy for the first time. You think the country who is funding, providing the weapons, and providing the instructors, guys who are telling people how to shoot your country, and the ISR, do you think they're your enemy? I don't know. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, if someone's trying to kill you, that's probably your enemy. But the Russians, they are the consummate professionals, man. They have the patience of Buddhist monks, and let's be thankful for that, because if it wasn't for that, we'd all be dead. Let's just put in perspective the China gold rush. This chart really puts it in perspective. This is China's stockpiling in gold, okay? And this is their divesting in the dollar. I wonder if there's a trend. I wonder if nothing bad is ever going to happen. Oh, shit. Let's see what what is this guy's name? The Chinese PLA Lieutenant General Xing Jinping. Let's see what he has to say. I'm sure it's positive. The U.S. uses the rules and orders as hegemonic narratives. When these rules and orders, let me go back, he talks too fast. When these rules and orders serve its interests, the U.S. employs them. When they do not, the U.S. discards them. The U.S. uses the rules to suppress others, but never to restrain itself. It always has acted egotistically, doing whatever it wants, from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Ukraine to Gaza. Now, this is the Chinese, okay? These are very strong words. These guys don't say anything that Xi Jinping doesn't approve because they're all scared of getting whacked. All these crises and conflicts are results of the self-serving double standards of the U.S. Since last year, the United States has frequently stood alone in dissent at the United Nations. It vetoed the Security Council's draft resolutions on Gaza, which they did, refused to implement the rulings of the International Court of Justice. I'm not sure if China's signatory to that. And repeatedly rejected Palestine's application for full UN membership, which has caused a heart-wrenching humanitarian disaster. Some people might say the pot calling the kettle black because of the, what are they called? That population that all the Fox News pundits always criticize China for suppressing in their own country. Who are they called again? It's on the tip of my tongue. Somebody write it in the comment section, please. These actions expose the hypocrisy of the United States. Where on earth are human rights that the U.S. has repeatedly professed? Facts have proved that the United States is the biggest source of chaos in the international order. That is such a hostile statement. The biggest stumbling block to global governments and the biggest challenge to regional peace and stability is the United States. I mean, we can just end it there. That is a major statement, okay? That is a major statement. Look at this guy. I mean, is he alive? Has he got rigor mortis? I mean, he looks like a character on Night of the Living Dead. The U.S. expects announcements on substantial weapons deliveries to Ukraine. It never ends, does it? Oh, and Israel's bringing in Indian workers. Thousands of them. And you know what that means? That means their workforce is very thin because they're calling up the reserves to go to war in Lebanon. Someday somebody's going to write a book about this, man. I just hope that the archives, that all these videos are being stored in the cloud, in the big server farms of the YouTube and Google. I hope they're in an underground bunker. Well, actually, let me scrap that. I hope they aren't, because then in the dystopian post-SHTF world, they're going to come after me. But, you know, maybe I hope they're buried somewhere and inaccessible for like thousands of years, and then they pull it up later and they can use my videos to break down how this whole thing unfolded. It's crazy. Is that all I have to cover today? Oh, South Korea. So they're going to be resuming artillery drills near the DMZ, and they're going to start blasting the loudspeaker propaganda again. This after balloons full of human feces and waste, hundreds of them, were flown over from North Korea to South Korea twice. Keep prepping, guys. I'm serious, man. I'm deadly serious. Judge me by my actions. And you might not see it. You're going to see it soon, because I'm going to try to share as much. It's just that to film it all, it's a lot of work building out a homestead. I mean, I'm trying to do so much right now. And I got people telling me, don't make the mistake of rushing like I did during COVID. And I'm telling those same people, this ain't COVID. This is something different. And my gut has directed me to where I am today. Maybe it's a higher power that I'm now going to go to hell for because I took the Lord's name in vain. Whatever it is that's been directing me to this point, to build this ark at this particular point in time, I'm telling you, how can I say this? But I've had some profoundly spiritual experiences in my life. And I say spiritual without a religious connotation. And I'm not saying that I have any sort of ethereal connection with the supernatural realm, but I believe that there's a force guiding me. Okay, now it's going to sound crazy to some people because I follow the science, with the exception of that one guy who, you know what he did, got us to do all that shit for the last 3 years. But on every other point, I follow the science to my own detriment often because, of course, people want you to take a side. And I'm going to stay true to me. And that's why I'm able to share what I hope are insights with you, useful insights. If there's anything you take away from this, it's just get ready. Because they ain't going to tell you. They ain't going to tell you when it's going to get wild. That said, we're all going to die. Soon, none of this is going to matter. Soon, in the relative sense of the universe being 13.8 billion years old and your lifetime being less than a century, in a few decades, if nothing happens, nothing's going to matter. But if you have to endure it, and because we exist in this mundane world, we have to minimize the suffering of those we love, and that's why we prep. I don't prep for myself. Okay, I really don't, because I've come to terms with death, believe it or not. I don't care if I shouldn't say that because then it might be misconstrued. I get it, right? I get what this is all about, and we're over an hour in, so we can get philosophical. It's not why I prep. I prep for others. And I've been thinking, maybe I will go in the first week. I'll step on a nail and get some infection, or I'll get sniped or something like that. As long as somebody good can inherit what I've created, I feel that I will have been a force for good in the world. I'm going to leave it there. Have a good night. See you on the flip side.